Well, we're about to get into game 2 here. Just loading into this. Okay, here we are. And so this is Biohazard, a map by Hawk485. I mean, the mini maps are so different looking now. It's kind of weird, disorienting. I don't recall the in-game mini maps looking like this, though. I think this is just the spectator view. I mean, yeah, because I was playing on Storm earlier, and I think that was fine. Alternately, it might just be because Biohazard and Storm might not have mini-maps yet, and we might be having just like this little temporary thing. But I swear I just played a game on Storm recently, and I didn't remember noticing this. But that just might have been because I was too focused on the game to really notice, I guess. But yeah, once again, we have Squeeler making quite a few SAMs. While Stuart98 is playing Angel again, and actually logically Angel is a really bad mech against SAMs. Actually, this might, I mean, I'm actually slightly curious, because Angel has always been a mech that had a few hard counters, and then, I mean, one of the main hard counters, of course, is the Helix, but now that the Helix is gone, I mean, and so you can't change that, but on the other hand, if you're playing Angel and you see a Helix, you can go for an Aegis now, and you can switch that once you see the Helix in game. That's possible. And so instead of just carrying the Gen, you might late game try to carry a Gen and a Aegis together. Who knows? Or you might opt to go for the Aegis instead of the Gen. Who knows? But did I just say who knows twice? Yeah, I did. Who knows? But on the other hand, if you see an Angel now, you can put bot spawners and SAMs into your loadout. Actually, I'm kind of surprised Squeeler isn't doing bot spawners. I feel like bot spawners would be very effective here versus an Angel. On the other hand, the SAMs didn't seem to have been having any issues dealing with the Angel either, because they do quite a lot of damage. And Armadillos are possibly, I mean, if the enemy Angel is not in a position to snipe your Armadillos until they start moving, then the Armadillos could be very effective, because they move rather fast, definitely faster than any other tanks in the game. On the other hand, if the Angel is in a position to be sniping your units, then Armadillos die very quickly. And actually, there's a couple Mech Monday games that in the past. Wow, that was like 2 years ago almost. That was over 2 years ago, wasn't it? Yeah, over 2 years ago, back in Mech Monday, it was proven that Angels are very good late game versus Armadillos. Early game, that's not quite as much of an issue though for the Armadillos though, because the Angel doesn't really get super powerful until level 7 when it gets its first level of ults. And once that happens, then Angels just start sniping away. They have more energy, they do more damage. On the other hand, now we have the generator, so the thing about the Angels having more energy is kind of moot. One thing though I'm curious though about is Stuart's choice of using the generator instead of adding energy guardians into his loadout. I think energy guardians, yes, they are a little more expensive, but on the advantage of energy guardians is that well, you don't have to carry around the thing, and they can't be killed. Well, they can be killed, but it's very hard to kill them. And starting next patch, according to Insane Fire, there's going to be an experiment with making guardians invulnerable. I believe they will die though when your mech dies, so keep that in mind. Also, I believe right now you can have an unlimited. I think you can have an unlimited amount of guardians right now. If you build more than 3, it becomes a little. It definitely gets weird. I mean, weird doesn't even begin to describe what happens when you build more than 3. It's a little glitchy, but ooh, okay. Wow, Armadillo's getting the shot off right before. Starting the shot right before Stuart lifted off, and so of course the shots continued to follow him even up into the air, which unfortunately for him did lethal damage. Okay, so yeah, looks like Stuart's shooters have taken this outpost. This outpost is going to be neutralized soon, and of course your shooters will enter that soon. And so yeah, it definitely looks like Stuart has the advantage here. There's nowhere for... Yeah, oh, and also now when you see a mass of Armadillos, you can... And also SAMs, you can just respond with bombs, because you can just add bombs into your loadout. One problem with Armadillos, with balancing them, was always that they were hard countered by bombs. If someone had bombs... Back in the Armadillo meta, which I helped pioneer. When someone had bombs, those armadillos died very quickly. When someone didn't have bombs, those armadillos were OP. So, of course, in the end, the decision was to nerf the hell out of armadillos, so they weren't OP. On the other hand, that just made them even worse than versus bombs because they couldn't deal with bombs. Now the thing is, anyone has bombs in their loadout. So, I mean, anyone who wants to can put them in their loadout. So when you see armadillos on the field, you go, okay, I'm going to build bombs. So now, I think it might actually come to the point where maybe armadillos might need to be rebuffed, or maybe. Then again, I think bombs have been nerfed since the last armadillo meta, so that might not be valid anymore. So I'm sort of curious. But on the other hand, I wanted to say that I thought Stuart would have an advantage here because he had the 2 extra outposts, and on top of that, the mid area is kind of isolated enough that I would expect the Longhorns to be able to trade well versus the Armadillos, but it seems I was wrong because very clearly Squeeler's mass won that. Of course, maybe Stuart's mass was suboptimal, but he's floating less actually, so although that's partially because he's been dying perhaps, but perhaps there's an argument that armadillos are still OP. Well, we can see what happens if Stuart tries bombing them, perhaps. But something tells me he's not going to try that. He's just going to continue trying to kill them one snipe at a time, and that's actually sort of working because, I mean, okay, now the outpost has been neutralized, but I think Stuart can hold on here if he gets infantry in here quick enough. Oh, and assuming he doesn't die again, because his mech deaths have definitely not been helping him in these last 2 games. They've definitely hurt him a lot, just him dying a lot. Actually, he is level 5 now, so he does have his ult now. He does have that enhanced railgun, or whatever it's called. I can't remember what it's called, actually. It's like, okay, whatever. Yeah, Squeeler shooting at the Longhorns from the back here. So yeah, it's definitely worth noting there's been some changes with Strike. Like, there's no more items, I believe. Pilots are still shown in this UI, but they don't do anything anymore in Strike. So that's also interesting. And so as a result, the meta will shift slightly. Like, the Beppo meta is no longer relevant. Beppo Striker is not a thing anymore. Striker might have indirectly been nerfed as a result because they had some of the best mech choices. I mean, they had some of the best pilot synergies. Historically, the Striker meta was always focused on damaged pilots. You would try to get as much damage as you could possibly get, and then you would dogfight and you would focus people down in the air. Now you can't min-max at all anymore because there's no stat modifying things anymore. No items, no pilots, no parts. Those have all been eliminated over time from the PvP rule set in AirMech, and the question is that a good thing? Maybe not for diversity. I mean, maybe not for the illusion of diversity, but it is good for it makes balance easier. And as a result, it might create in an environment where you have subpar balance, then the diversity gained by parts, items, and mechs is only an illusion. And it doesn't truly exist because of balance issues. I mean, you technically have the freedom to do whatever the hell you want, but it might not be viable. So in PvP cases, that's not really actually a viable option. On the other hand, if you had perfect balance, yes, that would be giving you extra opportunities. Stuart needs to get the heck out of there. But yeah, AirMech has never had perfect balance. I don't think any PvP game ever has perfect balance unless they remove everything from the game. And then at that point, it kind of removes the point of balance when you remove options, because really the point of balancing is to give you more viable options. The more balanced a game is, the more options you have. So I guess at the same time, you could argue that removing items and pilots, although it's made balancing easier, you could argue that it removes the point of balancing. But I think the true argument is, but I think at the same time it's easier to get a decent balance now. Although, to be honest, pilots were never too bad, because there aren't as many parameters you can change as like when you had parts where you could min-max all sorts of things. And so with only pilots and items, it wasn't too bad. You could balance that. It just took less time. It took more time than balancing without them. The advantage, though, however, balancing without parts, items, or pilots is that now you focus solely on mechs. And you no longer focus on, well, the Neo doesn't really benefit from this stat as much, or if you put Raven on a Neo, you can't carry anything, and also you move so fast that it doesn't even matter at that point because you're rubber banding yourself. And so there's all sorts of stuff like that, which makes it so... Okay, yeah, that Bertha's destroying. I should probably get back to discussing the game, because I just went on this really weird tangents about the perks and disadvantages of removing items and pilots from the ranked rule set. On the other hand, talking about the ranked rule set, unlimited PvP no longer exists in AirMech Strike. I'm actually super hyped about that. All we have now are pure normal units, no ultimates, I think no unit alternates either, and unit alternates, you could argue, added... to be honest, I don't think alternates made balance that... really. I don't think they made them that hard, because you could always just make the alternates weak, and that's what most of them were. They were weak most of the time. And so... as a result, it was kind of like the alternates didn't even exist in PvP for most of them. And, okay, and so that's kind of like the soft delete way of balancing, where you just intentionally make something so weak. Why is there a Devastator on the field? What the hell? Stuart, what the hell are you thinking? He should have just made Goliaths. He's not even near max upkeep. He should have just made Goliaths. Honestly, that's my opinion here. I mean... maybe if you were playing versus the Angel, I'd see a justification for a Devastator or two to block some shots, but I think Grinders and Rollers would be more effective for that, first of all, and two, I think Goliaths are just better overall. But yeah, I guess Stuart feels the need to make a Devastator, so yeah, that's his choice. That's also a lot of jumpers in his queue, that's interesting. But yeah, the easiest thing to remove something from the game is to just make it so blatantly underpowered that it just becomes an unviable choice, and once it's no longer viable, it just stops being a choice in PvP, really. And that's kind of like removing something from the game. And so that's how most alternates were treated, actually. Well, I don't think it was intentional that was done for the alternates, but that's what effectively happened. On the other hand, you can argue that it's hard to balance alternates normally, because the alternates, their stats were so close to the original unit that it was hard to make an alternate strictly... it was hard not to make an alternate either strictly worse or strictly better. Or usually worse or usually better. Because, yeah, you had a couple alternates like the Hyper Armadillo and the Heavy Flacker, the old Heavy Flacker, that were pretty popular, but most alternates just never were a thing. So yeah, so I guess we can argue that alternates never really contributed much to the game in the first place. And actually, talking about armadillos, Hyper Armadillos, in my opinion, are better than armadillos from a certain way to interpret the math behind it, because armadillos were always a little bit of a glass cannon unit, and so if you made them more of a glass cannon, it made them better at their specialty. Of course, that also made them weaker to bombs, so normal armadillos maybe not quite as hard countered by bombs as hyper armadillos. So that also creates some interesting things to analyze, because I was saying earlier, well, armadillos are hard countered by bombs, but they're really OP otherwise. But on the other hand, those were hyper armadillos I'm talking about. Normal armadillos are statistically pretty similar, but they're also a little different. I think they're a little less extreme, I guess you could say. As a result, the hard counters and the OP... I want to say capacity of OP. I almost said OP and then NIS, but that's a little bit risk. But the hyper armadillos were always just an extreme unit, and that made them hard to balance too, I guess. I know that made them hard to balance when you had set loadouts. Now it'd be easier to balance than before, but I guess I could say that my argument about armadillos and bombs is no longer valid anymore, because I was talking about hyper armadillos, and hyper armadillos don't exist anymore. And I think most people who ran armadillos in the past would run the hyper variant because they were kind of better. And so I guess you could argue that we could recreate the old things by we could create the old status quo by changing the current armadillo and the normal armadillo and maybe the seeker to more like what the hunter, seeker, and hyper armadillo are, because those are like two of the alternates that were actually used, while on the other hand most of the other alternates you can get rid of them and it doesn't change anything because no one used them anyways. So yeah, weird rant. Let's continue on to game 3 now. Let's hope I don't go on. Actually, that was an interesting tangent, though. I think part of the reason I'm casting Strike right now is, to be honest, the quality of the games are not exactly the best thing on Strike. So why am I casting it? 1, it's new, it's a novelty. 2, it's interesting to analyze the differences, because balance has been severely impacted by the introduction of loadout swapping mid-game. You can switch your units up, and that's what I was saying. Armadillos, maybe they're not as good as they used to be, because now you don't have hyper armadillos anymore, and so that's sort of like a unintentional nerf. And then 2, anyone can switch to bombs now. On the other hand, yeah, it's just very interesting that there's just been a lot of indirect and unintentional swaps and balance, and it's just kind of cool to theorize what will happen as a result, and also to observe what actually happens and to compare the predictions against the results.